Our next panel, some really interesting topics brought up there in that speech. And of course, the next panel appropriately is on the two wings, why India and China still hold the keys to world growth. Now, first off, I'd like to invite on stage Mr. David Carbon. He's the Managing Director of Economic and Currency Research at DBS Bank. And he's had 14 years of research experience covering the economies and markets of Asia and a group of 10 countries, I should say as well. He's a frequent contributor on my program, Asia Business Report on BBC World. Next up is Mr. Pradeep Pant. He's the Executive VP and President of Mondelez International. That's a global snacking and food brand, former Kraft Foods. It's known for brands such as Cadbury, Dairy Milk, Oreos, and Halls. And the panel discussion will be moderated by Professor Jagdish Sheth, the professor of Emory University. He's a professor of marketing at the Goizueta Business School at the university. He's also rather kindly asked me to stay to help moderate some of this discussion as well. So, gentlemen, I might just sit with you. And, of course, please do put your questions through to the Pigeonhole application because we'd love to hear from the audience too.
May, could I use a traveling mic, please? Thanks, great. And could I put up a couple of slides here? There we go. We're going to talk about China and India and sort of how they're driving growth here in Asia. And before we get into that, I thought I would just sort of put up a few slides to give you a bit of a picture of sizing this, give you some perspective here on what's going on. It's quite remarkable, and let me just kind of run through these with you. I think we'll each talk 5-6 minutes, and then we'll kind of open it up to things. The first slide here really sets the stage. I mean, we talk about changes out here. This is one of my favorite pictures. I call it the Immaculate Recovery. It's what everybody said, if you go back a couple of years ago, could never ever happen, right? Go back before Lehman Brothers blew up and you think about what you read in the newspaper every day, the front page of the Wall Street Journal, the front page of Financial Times. Every day you were reading the articles about who was driving global growth, right? It was always the U.S. consumer. He was buying everything. He was holding up the world's growth. Asia didn't buy anything. All Asia did was produce and save and sell this unit to the West and put all the money in the bank. Asia didn't buy anything. And if the U.S. consumer ever died, that Asia would wind up dying a death worse than the U.S. would. And we talked about it back and forth back then. And we finally got the test of this when Lehman Brothers went down, right? In September 2008, we got the perfect experiment for this. Ever since then, is there a light on this that I can shine with? Well, no matter. Let me just use my finger to shine. What we've got here, this is my picture. What we're trying to show here, on the bottom 3 lines here is GDP in the US and Japan and Europe over the past 4 years from the middle of 2008, right before Lehman Brothers went down, 4 years later to the middle of 2012, which basically bookend the entire global financial crisis. Well, not the entire thing, it's not over yet. We got a lot of deleveraging still to go. But in some sense, this is a 4-year period, which is the front and the back of the global financial crisis. And what we've got here on the bottom 3 lines here is GDP levels for the US, Japan, and Europe. And what you can see pretty clearly is that on this 4-year time frame, growth in these 3 key regions has gone absolutely nowhere. We were at 100 back in the middle of 2008. We're still at 100 today. We're a little below 100 for Europe. We're a little below 100 for Japan, slightly above, but not very much above 100 for the US. And Asia is the big red line, okay? This is what everybody said could not happen. You take from the middle of 2008 for Asia, Asia just kept on growing and growing and growing and growing. And I don't know if you can see the number up there on the scale at the top of that, but after 4 years, Asia got up to a number of 132. okay? 32 percentage points of growth, all right? This is remarkable for two reasons, right? 32 percentage points of growth on a 4-year time frame. In simple terms, it's 8% per year. In compound terms, it's a little over 7 and a quarter, something like that. This is remarkable because it's almost average growth for Asia, right? During what most people consider the biggest financial crisis in 100 years, Asia managed to grow almost at an average rate of 7.25% through this 4-year time frame. And number two, it did it with no help from Europe, it did it with no help from Japan, and it did it with no help from the US. This is, this is what everybody said could never happen, okay? It did happen. How do you explain it? Well, in simple terms, there's nothing magic going on here. It's really a function of the fact that Asia is no longer too small to matter. After 10, 20, 30, 40 years of pretty rapid growth, you used to be, very small, and you get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And after 40, 50 years of this, you're big enough to provide the demand to do your own economic growth driving, and that is what has happened. You go back to 1980, the Asia 10, which are the usual countries in Asia, were about 1/5 the size of the US. 10 years later, where we've gone from 20% the size of the US up to 40% the size. Another 10 years later, we're up to 80% the size. And now this year, the Asia 10, North Asia, Southeast Asia, including India, but definitely does not include Japan, we are almost as big as the US is, and next year, 2014, we should be exactly 1-for-1 with the US. By 2020, Asia is going to be 32% bigger than the US is, and it's this compound growth year after year after year after year, no magic here at all. You get big enough to provide your own demand, which drives your own growth, okay? Now, this is kind of a speed kind of thing, but what does it add up to? If you look at the dollars of growth that this measures over this 4-year time frame and look at how many dollars worth of growth that was, or euros or renminbi or rupees or whatever, the number of dollars it comes to, it works out that in this 4-year time frame, when the world was going through its biggest crisis in 100 years, Asia grew by enough where it essentially added a whole Germany to the economy, right inside here in Asia, okay? And it continues to do that. Every 3.5 years, Asia is growing. It's now big enough and it's growing fast enough that every 3.5 years, we put a whole Germany right here in Asia, okay? This is very important when you think about Europe and the Euro crisis and so on, right? People think, okay, maybe we've got the crisis under control now. The ECB has come out and put a lot of pressure on financial markets. They've backed away a little bit. But we haven't really solved, most people realize we haven't really solved the debt crisis there, because you don't solve the debt crisis until you pay back the debt, okay? How do we pay back the debt? Well, you need to run trade surpluses, and you get the money, and then you use the money to pay back the debt. Well, and that is why everybody wants Germany to really ramp up its demand, right? They want Germany to grow faster and provide more demand and buy more output from these periphery countries which are having their debt troubles. How could Germany do that? I mean, Germany could step up its growth from 1% to 2% or 3%. People would be very, very happy. But that's not going to do very much. Germany could kick its growth rate up all the way up to 4%. We're in dreamland here at 4% for Germany. And after 19 years, okay, at this kind of growth rate, after 19 years, Germany would add a whole Germany. It would double itself in size, okay? Asia puts a whole Germany on the map every 3.5 years, okay? So when you think about where is the demand going to come from, which may or may not keep these countries out of hot water, well, the demand is going to be coming from Asia, not from Europe and or Germany, okay? Let me show up one more picture here, and then I'll pass it on. Just a single picture here. The idea being to show what this has done for interregional trade growth in the region. Two lines here, two very simple lines. On the bottom line here, it's slightly beige. I hope you can see it. We've taken all the exports from all the countries in Asia to the US, except for China, because we're trying to measure them against China. So we take all the other countries except for China, all the exports, we translate them into US dollars, we add them all up, and we put them in a line here. We started back in 2001. And the red line in the top are the exports going up to China, and they have grown by about a factor of 8 over this period. And we do the same thing for all the other countries with their exports to the US. And on this 10, 11-year time frame, growth in exports to the US has been up a total of about 20%, right? Basically flat as a pancake. While to China, they've gone up by a factor of 8. People used to say, okay, nice picture, but this is really a function of US growth at the end of the day. People are exporting into China. China puts a little value added on, ships it off to the US. This is really final demand from the US, which is driving this picture. And now we know that this too is not correct, right? Because you go back to this picture, and what we see is that the final demand in the US over this 4-year time frame has gone nowhere. Final demand from Japan has gone nowhere. Final demand from Europe has gone absolutely nowhere. In fact, it's gone down. But Asia has continued to go up and up and up. Trade within the region continues to go up and up and up. And it has very, very little, if anything, to do with the US or Japan or Europe, which again, as you can see, have gone absolutely nowhere for the past 4 years. Okay, let me leave it there.
Hello, everyone. Before I jump into the subject, I just wanted to give a small clarification. Since many of you asked me yesterday and today if I'd left Kraft Foods and joined a new company, we actually spun the company October last year, and Mondelez International is the global snacking company that was a part of Kraft earlier. It's $36 billion. It's global. I look after EMEA and Asia Pacific, which drives a little more than half the growth dollars of the company. And coming to our subject, I don't think any of you are debating that India and China are indeed going to be key drivers of growth for businesses in the next few years to come. For us, for example, more than a quarter of the growth dollars will come from these two markets, just these two markets, globally. GDP, you saw the picture, is healthy. All categories, consumer goods categories, for example, are growing, and most of them are growing double digit. The middle class is burgeoning, but there are differences between the two markets. There is a difference in urbanization. The Chinese market, for the first time in 2011, there were more people living in urban areas than in rural, unlike India. The demographics are different. The Chinese population is aging. The one-child policy has led to a lot of challenges for them. For example, today you have a situation when there's a whole generation of people without brothers and sisters or indeed first cousins. So you have challenges. The infrastructure position in both the markets is very different. China infrastructure leads demand. In India, it is still lagging demand. And of course, when you come to the issue of law and order, in India, you have a lot of law, not too much order, and China is vice versa. So the challenge is really to see how to win in this market. The idea is not to say whether India and China are important. The question is, how do you win? And what I'm going to do is share with you 5 lessons amongst the many that we have learned in these markets. The first is in the area of being global. It's a subject that got touched on yesterday. It is a critical subject because global is not about picking up global initiatives and shoving them down the throats of these markets in the hope that something will stick. So let me tell you the story of Oreo biscuits in China. Oreo biscuits in China 6, 7 years ago were failing. The product wasn't working. we were about to withdraw it from the market. Before pulling it, we said, let's find out from the consumers as to why they don't like the product. We did some insights work, and we found the cookie, the American cookie, which we were selling there, was too sweet, the packs were too large, and the formats and flavors were not up to the Chinese taste. We rejigged the whole offering, reduced the amount of sugar, went into flavors like green tea for Oreo cookies, went into the wafer format, changed the price pack architecture completely. Sales today are 12 times what they were 5 years ago. And the brand is so large that it's bigger than our next biscuit competitor in the marketplace. When we went to India, the insights work told us that instead of calling it Kraft Oreo, Kraft was not a very well-known brand in India, if we called it Cadbury Oreo, it will resonate a lot more with consumers. And we called it Cadbury Oreo, and the launch has been absolutely phenomenal. So the lesson is go local, working with local consumer insights and shopper insights, and that is a necessary step to win in this market. The second area which I'd like to share with you is innovation. Innovation is indeed a key driver of growth in these markets. However, many organizations, including us guys in the past, made the mistake of trying to innovate across the board instead of focused innovation, which meant essentially you were getting into activism and not innovation. In 2009 in China, 10% of our sales, total sales, came from new product developments. There were more than 60 SKUs that we had put out in 2009. In 2012, 30% of our sales come from NPD, but the number of initiatives have been reduced by 30%. And all the innovation that's happening today is behind our 5 core brands. So innovation is a must, but focus, not activism. That's the second lesson. The third thing we learned was in the area of building capacity well in advance of events. And when I say capacity, I mean both manufacturing capacity as well as organizational capacity. Because the cost of failure to predict right is very high if you run out of capacity. If you don't use up the capacity, the cost is low because if not today, next year or the year after, you will suck it up. So it's not a problem. So I would urge you, if you're looking at a market like China or indeed India, to think in concentric circles. First, build a plan and program that maximizes the business in the categories and distribution footprint in which you play. As you build capacity, both organizational and manufacturing, expand distribution. And as that becomes successful, expand the portfolio that you're offering in the markets. And that's how we've managed to build. For example, we launched gum in China last year. A resounding success. So before we launched gum, because gum is sold at a completely different point in retail, the hot zone as we call it, the checkout, and not back of store in the main aisle. We learned over 6 months in one province, in Jiangsu province. We sold our existing products, Halls and Eclairs, at the hot zone, trained our sales force for it, built the capacity of the sales force, and then rolled out gum. And that led to the success, the concentric circle approach. The fourth lesson, I think, which is vital, is execution is 9 points of law. You execute well, you win. You don't execute well, no matter how brilliant your strategy, it ain't going to work. And execution is most vital in the area of route to market, sales, going to customers, to shoppers. There are subtle differences between India and China. China has a much more developed, modern trade. However, the frequency of visits from the consumer to the trade are still very high. The shopping basket is still very small. How do you win? Where do you win? How often do your sales guys go to the store? Where do they display? Doing this work, preparing for execution is critical. And equip your frontline people with tomorrow's technology, Salesforce automation, or whatever you want to call it. Last point I want to make before I hand it over to the prof, is winning the hearts of people in both these markets is as critical, if not more critical, than winning their minds or their pockets. You can pay, but the people will not stay with you. Rates of attrition in both these markets for many companies are very, very high. Especially when you look at younger employees, they want something from an organization well beyond money. What they want is, and this question has been asked of me, I don't know how many times, in town hall meetings. They say, what is the higher purpose of this organization? What are the values of this organization? Does the senior leadership actually live the values of this organization? Does this organization believe in social responsibility or not? When we launched an initiative called Hope Kitchens in China, which is going to backward rural districts and setting up kitchens in schools there, it has resonated so well with our employees and indeed our business partners that has become a competitive advantage for us, and I believe a sustainable competitive advantage. So these are the 5 lessons which I thought I'd share with you. And of course, you want to win, you have to persist. That's the last thought. Thank you very much.